Hello, book boys.
Hello, book boys,
We're back again,
with
and
Richard Wolff.
yeah, this is part two of Richard Wolff's "Democracy at Work: A Cure for Capitalism." We decided
So
to
last
split the
time,
episode. Yeah, we decided to
yeah,
split it up because we have some. We kind of wanted to. Phil wanted to spend some time talking about the business cycle, and we kind of didn't want to get it lost at the end of the episode. So we're going to pick up
yeah,
from
last time
there,
we,
and then going to try and finish things off.
we've kind of outlined his whole theory of the book, the idea of WSDEs, and yeah, we talked about his criticism of capitalism, which really mostly rests on the idea that there's this cyclical um, business cycle, which every now and then ends in crashes like 2008, 2012. Uh, I don't know how if Richard Wolff would say that the COVID crash is also capitalism's fault, but um, there are repeated crashes in our current economic systems. That's not to be denied. So the main reason why Richard Wolff is seeking for a cure for capitalism is because of these cyclical crashes where people lose their jobs, and it's not a good time. It's not like the end of the world. It's not like you're being sent to the gulag, but it's not good. No one is saying that it's good. Capitalists, free enterprise people are not saying crashes are good. But what we are saying is that it's not actually the fault of capitalism. It's the fault of government, and I'm going to get into that now.
Take it away. This is something
So
that I have. I'm completely in your arms. Please
yeah, and I
enlighten
think
us all.
that makes you the perfect conversation partner, because first of all, I would just ask, because you're A, pretty intelligent, but you're B, not super into economics. So
Yes.
I think you're the perfect sample person to ask, like, what is the business cycle? What's your like very broad general understanding of what the business cycle is?
Yeah.
And just like these cyclical crashes, booms and busts in capitalism. Like, just tell me what you know about it.
Um. I guess I know that the business cycle is this idea of expansion and contraction in the. I guess from the perspective of like stocks, we talk about the business cycle. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are periods where stock prices increase, and there are periods where stock prices generally decrease. And I guess that this is like um, a trend that's observed a lot, I guess, in capitalist society. Although I don't wouldn't know really how that would change in
Mm.
a different kind of economic system. Um, we have I know that like governments like people spending, or at least certain economists like people spending, and this austerity mindset is considered like a bad thing. Um,
Mm.
Saving is can be considered like a bad thing if it's there's too much of it, and I guess the this logic that like money needs to be continuously spent for this thing to work. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's a very it's a perfect layman's argument of the Keynesian perspective, I think, which we are taught in from middle school to university, and it's usually what you're getting in the news. Um, yeah. So, and the even though Richard Wolff does criticize Keynesians in their anti-cyclical policies, he does agree with Keynesians that capitalism has an endemic business cycle, and it's only the doctor government that can cure this business cycle. Um, so to give the Austrian school perspective on this, first of all, the the idea that there is some endemic business cycle to capitalism that has to be fixed by government or an outside entity is actually a Karl Marx idea, um, which originated, I think, I'm pretty sure it's in Capital, but he might have mentioned it in earlier writings as well. So, and it's actually true that the cyclical periodical booms and bust cycles seem to have appeared from the Industrial Revolution. and they weren't a thing at all before. So obviously you had economic busts before the Industrial Revolution, but that was usually because some king decided to invade another country or something like that, right? So this just like natural cycle, the business that just appeared, that was truly from the Industrial Revolution mostly, and especially I think it intensified after World War One as well. And so, it's not. And Karl Marx in this case was talking about mostly England, and when I say after World War One, I'm talking mostly about the U.S. But so it is true, even from the Austrian perspective, that this is like a relatively new thing that happened. So now we want to explain this, right? So let's gather some observations first. 3 things Austrians point out that are kind of mysterious about the business cycle is A, it's this periodical cyclical thing that appear all of a sudden. B, entrepreneurs who are usually considered, very good decision makers and very, their ability to forecast the market is what keeps their business in the plus, right? Like usually if you can't forecast the market and if your business is in the minus the whole time, you're probably not running a big company, right? So
you won't be right.
Yeah, the idea that the people who know what's going on all of a sudden have this massive cluster of errors, just like, everyone's just getting it wrong at this particular time. So that seems weird, right? Like, why are the people who usually understand, why are they mistaken in this big cluster of errors? And the third mystery is that, and this is easily verifiable if you look at kind of CPI data and such, and it's not, no one really disputes this, but that the inflation in the production, the capital goods sector, is a lot higher than in the consumer goods sector.
Can you say that again?
So in the capital goods sector, so the things that producers buy, so big machines, basically the means of production, things that you need to buy to run a factory and so on.
Yeah.
Whatever, cement, machinery, all that. They experience much higher inflation than the consumer goods sector during these kind of times. So that also seems to be kind of mysterious.
So you mean by that, if the price for a consumer item like an apple increases by 2 times, it will increase 3 times, maybe more, for an equivalent price of concrete?
Maybe not exactly 3 times, but that's basically the basic point. So like retail or like your average Big Mac or something like that, or like retail prices, they're not as affected as much as the as machines and equipment and all that.
Right.
So I said inflation is more prevalent, but I guess it would be correct to say the booms and busts are more prevalent. So the fluctuations in price
the highs are higher and the lows are lower.
Yeah. Right. Yes, exactly. So putting those 3 mysteries aside, we're going to come back to those later. The Keynesian perspective, kind of as you mentioned already, is to say that, saving is maybe bad, consumers aren't spending enough, the government has to step in and spend more. And to act counter-cyclically to the business cycle. Yeah. That doesn't explain the business cycle. That's just saying how to manage it, right?
Yeah. So when prices are low, you buy, and when they're high, you sell, kind of thing.
Yes. And we can talk about why that actually makes it worse in a different conversation. Sure. That's not what we're talking about today. We're just talking about where does the business cycle come from. Okay. So Karl Marx, after the Industrial Revolution, he observed that all of a sudden we have this boom and bust cycle appearing. And he said that it's just going to get worse, and eventually the workers are going to overthrow capital and so on. And Richard Wolff is also kind of going in that route, right? Well, Karl Marx is not the only person who was observing this, of course, and there are other economists who have had ideas about this. To a lesser degree, David Hume, and I think the oldest like referenced really correct, not correct, but consistent theory would be David Ricardo,
Yeah.
and it was then improved upon by Ludwig von Mises. So we're going to talk about the Ricardian idea first. So according to Ricardo, um, there's a mystery in the business cycle. We're going to have a fourth mystery now, which is that usually in any market, prices are in equilibrium, right? Nick, what are the two factors that determine prices according to general knowledge?
Supply and demand.
Exactly. So, anything that's priced ever, you have supply, you have demand, and what happens is, they meet somewhere in the middle and then the price is relatively stable. So according to this theory, like there's really no reason why the price should be in like a boom and bust cycle, right? It just should be in an equilibrium. And if supply and demand changes, it might go up and down a bit, but there is nothing cyclical about this process,
So
right?
the supply and demand is separate to this like boom and bust cycle.
Well, that's what the Keynesians say for some reason,
Okay.
that it's separate. But the Austrians say there's really no reason why it should be separate at all.
Right.
The demand for money and the supply for money act upon the price of money, or the value of money, in the same way that supply and demand act on every single other good. There should really be no difference. So Ricardo, and Ricardo is not an Austrian, of course, but Ricardo then says, so what's going on here? And Ricardo kind of puts the blame at the foot of the banks. And I'm not going to agree with that totally, but let's just outline the theory first. So Ricardo says if money would completely just be commodities like gold and silver. And by the way, I'm referencing an essay by by Murray Rothbard called "Economic Depressions: Their Cause and Cure." We're going to link it in the description if you want to have a look. But Ricardo says that if money was just gold and silver, that this analogy to regular determining of prices of good, it's very intuitive, right? Like demand for gold, supply of gold determines price of gold, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason why there should be like any cyclical booms and busts in the price of gold. Now what happens is that banks step into this whole thing, and banks increase the money supply beyond what actually is there. So let's say a bank has 1,000 ounces of gold, but it actually issues redeemable credit receipts for 3,000 ounces. So now, we have a deficit of 2,000 ounces, more than actually exist.
Yeah.
And as long as there's no like big run where everyone runs to the bank and tries to redeem everything, there's no problem with this.
It's creating like artificial value.
Yeah, it's banks don't create wealth, but they do create money, right? They do increase the money supply.
Okay.
So banks then happily begin to do this because the more they increase the money supply, the more they can lend to people, the more they can, profit from it.
Yeah.
That's how
and
just
banks are
work.
always taking bets as well, I guess.
Yes.
They're speculating when they're doing this that like that they can return on what they're doing. Maybe I don't.
Yeah, it's in their interest to loan out more money, right?
Yeah.
To the degree that they're not. There's like a threshold where they might say if we loan out like 20 times the amount we actually have, that's probably too risky, right?
Yeah.
People. So there's like a little golden middle there, but
Yeah.
generally it's in their interest to expand credit as much as they can.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what happens on a national scale in this gold and silver kind of money economy? The expansion of the money supply in any country, let's say Wales, because we're all patriots here. So the banks in Wales expand the money supply, and or the paper money, right?
Hmm.
Not the amount of gold.
Yes.
And so, Nick, what happens to the value of money when you increase the supply?
£1 can buy you less things.
Exactly. The value of money
Woohoo.
goes down. And we call this, what do we call this? We call this inflation, right?
Inflation. My
Exactly.
favorite
So
kind
now
of
we have.
pornography. Sorry.
Oh God. So now we have inflation, but not like hyperinflation, like moderate inflation. So prices go up, right?
Yeah.
And as you will often hear by like modern economists parroted that you want to aim for like a 2% inflation rate, right? I think you often hear that.
Okay.
That like you don't want like on the yearly scale, you don't want 0% inflation, you want about 2%.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard that
No,
before.
I hadn't heard it before.
And like even in Japan, the central bank has like a 2% inflation target.
Okay.
But basically the idea is that as prices increase very moderately, the increased money bids up the prices in Wales, and we now call this a boom. Like the economy is going up basically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once we introduce global trade to this, what happens though on the global scale? Like, you think in Wales now everything is getting more expensive on paper at least, and wages are also rising, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to catch up with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens to imports and exports with Wales? Think about this for a second.
If products in Wales become more expensive, they stop. They find it more difficult to sell things abroad.
Exactly.
And are incentivized to buy cheaper things from abroad, right?
Exactly. They lose competitiveness, and now we have exports going down and imports going up. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just what happens. But if we're in a global or semi-global economy, we're moving towards this trend where the Welsh, they buy less and less at home and more abroad.
Yeah.
And sometimes this is called a deficit of balance of payments or something like that. And I think Trump is campaigning on this a lot as well, where they say we have a deficit with China, trade deficit with China, right?
Right.
Although this makes maybe less sense now because there isn't gold anymore. But anyway, so now that we have this trend of rising imports and falling exports, what happens to the money supply of Wales? Now the Welsh banks, they're gonna have, like, if you think about foreign investors and all that, money will flow out of Wales because they're paying for things abroad, right? They're buying stuff from abroad. Yeah. But foreign investors, what are they more likely to be interested in? Welsh banknotes, redeemable at a Welsh bank, or gold from the, that
you can trade anywhere. Yeah, gold.
Yeah, exactly. So probably gold. So effectively what happens is gold flows out of Wales.
Right.
And now you have less and less gold, which is the basis of the banking system, and more banknotes that are pyramiding on less and less gold.
Becomes even more inflated than just through those transactions.
Yeah, inflation certainly also goes on, but we now have kind of a pyramid scheme problem, right? Because let's say originally I think I said 1,000 gold ounces and 2,000 notes or something of ounces. And now maybe if we have only 500 ounces of gold left.
Yeah.
So the banks are now they're gonna maybe think about reversing this whole credit expansion thing because their gold supply is dwindling, and if say like 20% of their customers want to redeem their savings, they cannot pay them out, right?
Yeah. So there's
And
not enough gold to supply everyone in Wales that's owed gold.
yes. I mean that is just certainly the case
In
anyway
this
with
example.
banking.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. But it's
That's, I mean, yeah. Even if we say that there's 1,000 ounces and we land at 1,001 ounces, there isn't enough to pay everyone out.
yeah.
But
We're talking about becoming more and more extreme.
yes, the bottleneck becomes more and more tight. So the banks are panicking, and people obviously are picking up on this. There's
Yeah.
newspapers. People are not
Yeah.
completely ignorant. So there's kind of a panic where people try to pull out money.
Yeah.
And
Greek
banks have to
financial
reverse
crisis.
this whole inflation thing, financial crisis. There's one or two things that can happen. Either people run to the banks, can't pull
Yes.
out their money, the bank collapses, or it doesn't get to that, but the banks, they do have to reverse their whole policy, where now this credit expansion becomes credit contraction. They're not increasing their credit anymore, and so we go from inflation to deflation,
Yeah.
and we go from a boom to a bust, right?
Yeah.
So that's the Ricardian idea of this whole cycle.
Yeah.
Now, of course, looking at this, you could say, but banks are private institutions, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't we say that the boom and bust cycle then is endemic to capitalism, right? Because
Right.
it's a bank is just an institution. Well, the Austrian answer is no, because if we truly just have private banks in free competition, this never happens, and in fact, it has never happened. The only way this can happen is when we have a government central bank, and the reason is this. If we have private banks that are not guided by any central bank, and we're sticking with this gold example for now, what happens if one bank decides to expand their credit? They have to balance their books. So if they want to lend out more money they don't have, they have to borrow that from another bank.
Yeah.
So they have to increase their debt at another bank. This is the exact same thing as the earlier example where foreigners, where the Welsh increased their debt at foreigners' institutions, right? So now in this example, the other bank is the foreigner, and the initial bank is the Welsh. So what the other bank is going to do, as this bank just keeps increasing their credit, at some point they're going to go like, okay, we're going to redeem some of this gold, right?
Yeah.
That's just like how competition works. So, and that would essentially nip this whole thing in the bud before every single bank in the country would start doing this. Because it's the same thing with the foreigners, right? We would want to redeem the gold, so maybe that bank would have a problem, but every single bank in the country can't do this at the same time.
Okay.
And in fact, before we had central banking, this boom and bust cycle just wasn't a thing. So what happens with a central bank, with a government bank, that now steps in and says, this is not just gold, this is the English pound, this is the Welsh pound.
Mm-hmm.
And this is now the legal tender. This is the only accepted money in the country. It's illegal to use other money. And all the banks are now, and this is very, very, I actually don't know if this is accurate with the London, when the English bank expanded in Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
But it's certainly the case with the Federal Reserve in the US, where, they just print new money.
Yeah.
And then they just simply distribute it to all the banks. So there's like a bank higher. There's the national banks and the regional banks and the local banks.
Yeah.
And so and this is very much part of this whole Keynesian thing as well, where the central bank can artificially increase credit beyond what's actually there, and all the banks are going to go along with this because they don't have any accountability towards the central bank. They can just keep borrowing credit from the central bank without limit.
And they're incentivized to do so because it's basically a good deal for them.
Yeah, and even if they don't do it, all
responsible for
it. The competitors are going to do it anyways.
Yeah. So if there was no central bank doing that, if an individual private bank decided that they wanted to expand their credit beyond really far beyond their reserves. They would be able to do that, but it would
Only
never
at
be able to expand to such a large scale, because at some point they would be asked to repay on those loans to other banks, and if they were unable to do it, only this one bank would like fail and close.
Yeah, so they can't just like the central bank, they can't just print up money.
Right.
They have, if they want to expand their credit, they have to go in debt at some other institution, so at another bank.
Yeah.
But if you do this a lot,
Yeah.
to the point of unreasonability, the other institutions are going to be like, we're going to have to see some of your gold.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas with the central bank, that's not the case, because they can, that's the whole point. They can just print money that's not even there.
Yeah. Decide we want to solve this problem. We're going to give this much, we're going to make this money, we're going to give it out, and it's going to ease this thing temporarily. At least that's the logic, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So however, this still doesn't answer some of our mysteries, because we still haven't answered why this whole thing is more extreme in the capital goods sector than in the consumer goods sector.
Yeah.
And we still haven't really explained why all these entrepreneurs are making all these judgment errors, right?
Before we get into that, just to recap, the mystery of why the business cycle exists as a boom and bust is because the government decides to pump money at low points and restrict at high points.
Yeah, so the Ricardian theory would be that it allows banks to expand credit beyond what would be possible if there's actually a real money, like gold or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Only by having a fake make-believe money that is
a fiat currency.
Or even if it's tied to gold. We had, I think it got really bad, and that's why we're going to talk about why the Great Depression was so bad. Because it happened after the U.S. decided to decouple gold from the U.S. dollar.
Right.
But before that, there was still some shackles. Anyway, central banking enables this like continuous inflation of the money supply without accountability for individual banks.
Okay.
Okay. Going back to our two unsolved mysteries.
Yeah.
And this is, you can't expect everything from good old Ricardo here, but so Ludwig von Mises basically, what would you call supplement completed this business cycle theory by making a crucial observation that when the central bank increases the money supply, they don't just, it's not just that inflation increases. There's one other thing that happens, and this is very much, anyone in the stock or like even crypto or like finance industries knows this, and this is talked about all the time. What's the Fed going to do this week? Are we going to go up or down? And like,
right.
what is the one other thing that central bank credit expansion does in the global market? Think for a second here.
What's one other thing that it does?
So yeah, what does the central bank decide? Basically, what's their big monetary policy tool?
Monetary tool, like the stock market?
It's tied to that. Okay, so let's think about the price of money, not the value of money, in the sense that everyone has time preferences, right? So you would rather have money now than in the future.
Oh, okay, right.
So
loans.
Obviously, yes, loans. Yeah. I'm talking about the interest rate, basically, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So by pouring new loan funds into the economy, the central bank actually lowers the rate of interest in the economy below its free market level. And if you watch any like stocks streamer. It's always going to be about what's the Fed doing, this like interest rate hike, yes or no.
Yeah.
And so like at the time, this was like a big discovery that Mises that was central to this thing. But now we all acknowledge that the central bank is doing this. We're just not tying it to the business cycle for some reason.
Okay.
But yeah, so again, time preferences, usually people want money now rather than in the future because it's hard to forecast the future. And, if there's inflation, money will be worth less in the future and all this and that.
Mm-hmm.
So in the free market, there will be some kind of agreed upon interest rate that's super complex. What decides the interest rate? Nobody fucking knows. Everyone's time preferences in the whole country decide the interest rate, right?
Right.
So it's like, but central bank now steps in and artificially manipulates the interest rate. Now, what does this do? If you're an entrepreneur and the interest rate is now artificially lowered, if you can borrow money cheaper than you could before, that's quote unquote good for business, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can now borrow money for cheaper. Long-term projects that were originally not feasible, not profitable, are now profitable because you can borrow money at very cheap rates.
Yeah.
And that's why, a lot of, in politics, presidents will always sometimes do this when the economy is doing shit. They just lower interest rates. So we have an artificial boom, but they never think about the long-term consequences.
Yeah.
So yeah, entrepreneurs now invest in and now we tie it back to the mystery, in capital goods, right? They buy machines, cement, buildings. They start building projects that take years, that weren't feasible at the market rate, but they are feasible at this new artificial rate.
Mm-hmm.
So we now have all these projects going, right? And let me read a little section from the Rothbard book I mentioned earlier. Businesses, in short, happily borrow the newly expanded bank money that is coming to them at cheaper rates. They use the money to invest in capital goods, and eventually this money gets paid out in higher rents to land and higher wages to workers in the capital goods industries. The increased business demand bids up labor costs, but businesses think they can pay these higher costs because they have been fooled by the government and bank intervention in the loan market and decisively important tampering with the interest rate signal of the marketplace. The problem comes as soon as the workers and landlords, largely the former, since most gross business income is paid out in wages, begin to spend the new bank money that they have received in the form of higher wages. Okay, so let's put this together. What's going on here? Businesses entrepreneurs have borrowed more. They've expanded their, entrepreneurial activities. They started all these long-term projects. And now, we have more people employed. Unemployment has gone down. People are earning more. Wages go up. Typical boom. Economy is quote unquote going well. Now, what do the workers do when they get this new money? Their actual time preferences, so their ratio of consuming to saving, hasn't changed. It's only the interest rates which have artificially been depressed. So workers are gonna, with this new money that they have, they're gonna still spend they're gonna still consume and save at the same rate that they're gonna before, because why would they all of a sudden change their preferences, right?
If they have a higher wage, would they be inspired to spend more money?
They might be, but there's nothing intrinsically that would say that the ratio of the money they consume or spend and the ratio of the money that they save would change, right? Like you wouldn't. There's no real reason why the newly employed, either people who got a wage increase or people who were now employed who were previously unemployed, there's no reason for them to now save more than they were before, right?
I guess so.
Yeah, so their time preferences have not changed, basically, is the point. So they're still going to consume at the same rate and save at the same rate. So at least on the outset of things, we're going to have more consumer spending now, as this new bank money, this new printed money, filters through the system, right?
Just because there's a higher amount of actual cash.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let me continue reading.
Yeah.
For the time preferences of the public has not really gotten lower. The public doesn't want to save more than it has, so the workers set about to consume most of their new income, in short, to re-establish the old consumer saving proportions. This means that they redirect the spending back to the consumer goods industries, and they don't save and invest enough to buy the newly produced machines, capital equipment, industrial raw materials, etc.
Right.
Okay, the wording here is a bit tricky, because he says the consumers don't save enough to buy the new equipment. Obviously, the buying the new equipment is the capitalists, right? Not the workers. The step in between that's abridged here is the only way in a really free market that capitalists can actually invest more, can actually borrow more money, is for workers to save more, right? Because every single dollar that is invested, where does it come from? It comes from savings, right?
Yeah.
And I hate economic academia, but to give one credit to them, is one of the first equations you learn is S equals I, saving equals investment, right?
Yeah. And when you're talking about saving, you're specifically talking about saving in a bank.
Yes. If you put cash below your mattress, that's not gonna.
It's in a form that can be accessed by capitalists to buy machinery, etc.
Yes. Yeah, so if you put cash below the mattress, that would usually be called hoarding, which is usually looked down upon by economists. But saving is quote unquote good because it increases investment. So now we have all this new money filters through. People buy more, consume more. But there's no real reason to save more for them. So as soon as all this money is filtered through, the realization actually is that, we actually invested more, we actually borrowed more savings than there are. And now, because the savings haven't gone up, what happens to the price of money is interest rates go up.
Okay.
Right? So the price of money, the interest rate is determined by the supply and the demand of money.
Mm-hmm.
Demand of money is the people who borrow the money.
Yeah.
The supply of money is the people who save, right?
Yeah.
So if demand goes up, but supply stays constant, what happens?
The price of money, demand of money goes up.
If the demand let's go away from money for a second.
Okay.
If demand goes up and supply stays the same, what happens?
The price goes up.
The price goes up. In this case, we're talking about money.
Yeah.
So demand for money goes up, borrowing goes up, saving does not go up. So the price of money or the interest rate goes up.
Yeah.
So what happened now? We've borrowed a lot and so on. We've artificially set the interest rate low, but now we realize there actually isn't enough saving.
Mm-hmm.
And the interest rate goes up. And what happens if the interest rates were artificially low, but now the interest rates go up a lot? What happens?
Bad things.
The crash happens. This
is predicated on this. So just to take a little step back. In this equation, we have the government produces more money. The banks have a surplus of money, which means they can offer lower lower interest rates. Companies take advantage of that by borrowing a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
They reward their employees more, and as a consequence, consumer spending increases.
Yes.
But because consumer saving doesn't increase, this leads to a shortage in time from the banks, so interest
Sorry,
rates
repeat that last
increase.
part.
Employees or people who now have more cash
Mm-hmm.
will spend more,
Mm-hmm.
but they won't save more. So there's less money
Mm-hmm.
going into banking institutions, which increases
Mm-hmm.
the demand of money.
Especially because if you consider we're in an inflationary boom, right? So money over time is worth less. So the incentive is actually not to save,
Right.
it's to spend, right?
Yeah. So the banks have less reserves or less money to pull from,
Mm-hmm.
which means they have to increase their interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's where we go from boom to bust. So
Yes.
to read a
Yeah.
little part from the chapter again, the inflationary boom thus leading to distortions of the pricing and production system. Period. Sorry. Prices of labor and raw materials in the capital goods industries had been bid up during the boom to too high to be profitable once the consumers reassert their old consumption investment preferences.
Right.
The depression is then seen as the necessary and healthy phase by which the market economy sloughs off and liquidates the unsound, uneconomic investments of the boom and reestablishes those proportions between consumption and investment that are truly desired by the consumers. The depression is the painful but necessary process by which the free market sloughs off the excess and the errors of the boom and reestablishes the market economy in its function of efficient service to the mass of consumers. Since prices of factors of production have been bid too high in the boom, this means that prices of labor and goods in these capital goods industries must be allowed to fall until proper market relations are resumed.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've kind of put all our mysteries into place.
So,
Why the production goods sector is affected more than the consumer goods sector, and why all these entrepreneurs who usually are on top of things making all these forecasting errors. It's because the market signal, the interest rate, has literally been artificially distorted and is not telling you what the actual economic conditions are anymore.
Yeah.
And there are some other details we could go into here, but without dragging this out too long, that is the Austrian explanation for the business cycle. And it's after 1936, the Keynesian explanation kind of took over, which isn't really an explanation. It's just saying that we should countercyclically spend and saying that
Yeah. Right.
the consumers are at fault. But as far as I know, and as far as all the Austrians and other people I've read claim, there's actually no Keynesian refutation of the Austrian theory. It's simply that it went out of fashion. And you can imagine why, because if you think about incentives of academics and politicians and so on, the Austrian explanation, which says that central banking is bad, we shouldn't increase government spending. In fact, the government shouldn't spend money at all, really, and we shouldn't artificially tamper with the interest rates to serve political purposes. And the economists and the expert aren't actually these savior doctors who have to fix the economy.
Right.
That's not going to be a message that's popular with those exact elites, right?
Yeah.
And so the Keynesian explanation, where there's just this inherent flaw of capitalism that only the government can fix, that's very attractive if you're the person who's in charge of all the money.
So to bring this, we don't have to go straight back into it, but just to reference Wolff, he's critical of Keynesianism, and he does describe it like you did as this, this Keynesian explanation isn't an explanation. It's actually just an assertion that this is the logic of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's the logic of capitalism, the obligation of the government and economists is to apply the correct measure of expansion and contraction at the appropriate times.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's another thing we could go into. I'll save this for another day, but very briefly. what happened after the Keynesian policy had been implemented for a couple of decades, throughout mostly the 50s to 60s, is that in 1971 too, we first had the big oil shock, where for the first time we've really had stagflation. So usually it was the case that during boom you have inflation, and during a recession you have deflation, right? But during the oil shock, after Keynesian cyclical policy for a couple of decades, for the first time we have stagflation, so that you have a recession where usually the sugar coating on the bitter pill is that, unemployment and shit is going up, but at least prices are going down, right?
Right.
It's deflation. But not even that's happening anymore. So now when we have a recession, we still have inflation. So we have inflation at the same time as the economy is not growing.
Yeah.
And that is the poison that the Keynesian policy has poured into the water as well. And that's since 1970s, that's been our recessions have also had that element to it.
What concern?
Our recessions have also had this stagflation element to it.
Yeah.
Which has not been the case before ever. So there's a whole nother Austrian explanation of why Keynesianism is the reason for that. We'll save that for a different day. But the reason I mention that is because Richard Wolff in this book always asserts that the capitalism has failed to increase wages, right?
Right.
So that it's not just the the whole business cycle thing. It's also that wage growth has slowed down or reversed even. And if you think about it in like a very simple, no central bank, no cyclical policy economy, that's actually not a problem, because until we had central banks continuously inflating the money supply, and this is a perfect, if you look at the kind of from the American Independence Declaration until about the central banking system, the continuous trend has been that during economic growth you have a stable deflation.
Okay.
So as the economy gets richer, prices go down, and this inherently makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's only since we've kept pouring fake money into the economy every year that we have continuous inflation. And so in that kind of system, though, where you have stable deflation and increasing growth, it's not a problem that wages don't rise, because the price of goods is going down.
Yeah. Whereas today, in the UK, for example, cost of goods is going up, but wages apparently aren't reflecting that.
Yeah. Or at least they're not catching them as fast. So
yeah.
And that is a fair criticism, but it's not a fair criticism of the free enterprise system.
Okay.
In my view.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and this is another tricky thing here with capitalism, because it's not exactly clear what we mean by that. Like,
yeah.
I wouldn't say that business cycles are endemic to the free market.
Right.
But if by capitalism you mean a free market based central banking system, then yes, they are endemic to capitalism.
Say that one more time.
So I would not say that booms and bust cycles are endemic to the free market system.
Yeah.
But if by capitalism you mean free market system plus central banking,
right,
and Keynesian like anti-cyclical policy, if you want to make it even worse,
yeah,
then yes, boom and bust cycles are endemic to capitalism.
Okay.
So it depends how you define capitalism, right? But I think Richard Wolff is kind of blaming it on the free market, from what it seems to me. I certainly don't read anywhere that he's blaming central banks. Okay.
Cool.
So with that all in mind, you can see why it's very frustrating for me that the whole point of this whole book, the first like half, is this assertion that because of free markets we have recessions, and that's why we need socialism.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute. Yeah. So again, the recommended reading for this is called Economic Depressions: Their Cause and Cure by Murray Rothbard. I'm going to put it in the description.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. Any thoughts on that?
Very well explained. I
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, obviously, I can't say anything about what Rothbard is claiming, but
Hmm.
um, yeah, I definitely, from the things that you've told me, seem to make
Yeah.
sense.
Hmm.
And I guess, I mean, I would be, I'd like to like see some graphs and see some data and see some stuff on that as well. Um,
Hmm.
I find it interesting that um, you talked about a increase in wages as a result of um, businesses and entrepreneurs expanding from low interest rates would not impact saving. Um,
Or well, at least the ratio of consumption to saving.
yeah. The ratio, but specifically the ratio, I guess, is like
Yeah.
um, I guess it because and I guess the reason why is that like if you're able to buy more with your money,
Hmm.
which I think is the short term reality, right? Like you have more money,
Hmm.
um, so surely that would mean that instead of spending 50% of that money on groceries, you're now able to spend 30% um,
Hmm.
or on your lifestyle. Why wouldn't you save that extra 20%?
Hmm.
Um, is this just like an observation or is this just like a historical observation?
So there are two main theoretical reasons given here. The first one is that the it's just that there's this intrinsical kind of time preference of people, and just because government has artificially lowered interest rates, there shouldn't be a reason why that is affected. The second reason, which I think is much more intuitive, is that we're talking about this boom, inflationary boom, where prices and wages are going up. So, I already just said it, it's inflationary.
Yeah.
So what happens during inflation is saving is not going to be incentivized, right? Because if you save your money, it's going to be worth less in the future.
Okay.
Whereas if you spend it right now, you're going to get more for it than you're going to get in the
Oh, of
future.
course, yeah.
Be-
Yeah. If
because because it's inflation.
you want to save when there's a high interest rate. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah, I
usually
see, I
also
see, I
the
see.
the basic explanation for how the savings rate kind of naturally balances
Mm,
itself, is that during inflation you're going to have people saving less,
hmm
um, and spending more, and during deflation, sorry, I forgot the word, during a deflation, it's going to be incentivized, people are incentivized to save more, but then what happens when you save more? Again, S equals I.
hmm
As you save more, there's going to be more money available for investment.
Yeah.
Investment is the primary driver of economic growth. So that's why, deflations, unless they're artificially kind of tampered with, they're not going to last forever. As people save and save more and more money, there's going to be more and more investment available. Investment is going to increase economic growth, and
Yeah.
then we go back into the positive, right?
hmm
So that's how the savings rate is thought to naturally balance itself.
So, in a world where there's no central bank and where, you know, so there are no means of artificially inflating the value of money, the
Mm.
value of any money, um, what would you like expect constant growth, or would what maybe
Yeah, I
you
mean,
can't give
there's
that in, like
there's
prediction,
no
but
reason there's no reason to assume that growth would be infinite, and
Yeah,
just by physical limits it
sure.
wouldn't be. But when we're talking about prices of goods, certainly they wouldn't be inflating constantly. They would be deflating, and that
Yeah,
is the trend. That was the case before central banking.
right.
And so, yeah, it depends also what your money is. So if it's gold, obviously, if we find out like a huge gold supply somewhere on the planet,
Yeah, yeah,
we're going
yeah,
to have an
for sure.
inflationary period. But if we say that it's like the gold supply is constant, or let's say it's Bitcoin or something,
Yeah,
and the money supply is really doesn't change at all, then yeah, as you have more division of labor and as the economy gets more efficient, and technology is another factor, right?
hmm,
Going back to the solo model, some people know the solo model, I think, is the technology is another constant factor of growth. So as technology increases, you're going to have more growth, more effective production,
yeah,
and there's prices would decrease, and that's how you would define people getting wealthier, is that their
yeah, yeah.
wages may be the same but the prices are going down, right?
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned technology because I think this is super relevant to this conversation.
Mm.
People talk about like, wages stagnating, cost of goods going up, and one of the kind of common criticisms of technological development, especially like automation, is that people like people like look at the past and they see how things have become more productive, but they don't feel that uh, they are, you know, they don't feel that they're earning more or that their money
Mm.
has more value in spite of like these increases in productivity and efficiency. Does that connect to this at all?
uh Short answer is no, but
Mm,
yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree that in especially recent years, wage growth has been not as good as it could be, and inflation is a problem.
yeah,
So this frustration that we're on paper getting more efficient, but people don't feel it, I think that's real.
yeah,
I don't think it's really connected to technology. I think it's connected to why is there inflation to begin with,
yeah.
and that again leads us to the central banking discussion.
I guess
Um,
the question is that if we were rid of this business cycle or this like artificial inflation and deflation,
yeah,
would do you think that people would see more value or more money in their pockets for
yeah,
these technical developments? You would, okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
And another thing about this whole growth thing is that um, we often hear that capitalism can grow. There is no such thing as infinite growth. Until one's growth stops, capitalism stops. But
Mm,
that has just intrinsically never made sense to me, because in order for the system to run, you don't need perpetual growth. It's totally fine if we grow a lot and then we just stay at the same level forever. There's
right,
nothing
right.
wrong with that.
Yeah,
So
sure, sure.
um,
Um,
it doesn't mean that we're going to be less wealthy. It just
yeah,
means
yeah,
we're going to
yeah,
be
yeah. I
the
see, I
same.
see. Yeah,
So
you can stay at this level where things are comfortable.
yeah, yeah. And again, it will be a problem if we have continuous inflation but wages don't grow. Then we have a problem. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there, if we don't increase the money supply, there's really no reason why inflation should happen to begin with.
So it's the finicking with the system that makes the problem. Is what
Yeah,
the claim of Rothbard is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
When it comes to like, so to not like hark on technology, but like for example,
Mm,
we have like there's a lot of investment in new technologies like AI, for example, and
yeah.
um, if those investments are made on the back of this artificial inflation and deflation like business cycle,
Mm-hmm.
does that I mean, you have industries that become speculated as much higher value than they actually are, right? I don't know if that makes sense.
I don't think this is connected to the business cycle,
Okay,
but
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
don't want to
mean,
get
yeah,
too off track, but
certainly speculation can be wrong. That's, yeah.
yeah.
But,
I
mm,
guess the reason I ask is because it's, sometimes, many times it's connected to the state, right? State speculation on
yes.
certain things,
Right.
forcing the economy in certain directions and creating this sense of value where there not isn't necessarily actual value, right?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that because a very specific thing Wolff talks about in the book, as in regard to depressions, is the 2008 crash.
Yeah,
And, there are many people have talked about why it happened and so on, but the fact that he doesn't mention that, he just says that it's a problem of the private enterprise system and corporate greed, and that Freddie Mac and Freddie May and other what is it, government, is it GSEs, I think, government sponsored enterprises, are not mentioned in the whole book ever. It's a
right, right,
big
right,
problem,
right.
because as you maybe are aware, a problem of the 2008 crash were that there were too many subprime mortgages
Yeah,
which weren't transparently visible. Um, and Wolff says, "Oh, the capitalists blame government, but they suck." But uh, if you want to talk about this issue in a meaningful way, maybe it would be good to mention that Congress legislated. Let me say that again. Congress legislated by 2007 that 55% of loans approved by the GSEs, Freddie Mac, Freddie May,
hmm
have to be subprime. Congress legislated 55% of mortgages approved to be subprime. And you're just not going to mention that and be like, yeah, capitalism sucks. So, and and there have been investigations into this, and some reports say that actually a lot of mortgages were subprime anyway, so the increase hasn't been that much.
Sure.
And so, there are intelligent ways to talk about this issue,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that it's not even mentioned. It's just such a dishonest. I don't know.
Mm.
So that was just kind of pissing me off as well. And then the rating agencies, which approve these
Credit rating.
the credit ratings, yes, and all the risk tranches,
Yeah,
um, and they essentially put these AAA ratings on these really shitty mortgages.
yeah,
But again, the rating agencies, there are like three that are like approved or so by the government. It's a very
mm.
highly regulated industry.
Yeah.
It's certainly not free competition out there in the rating industry. So, like,
So competition in
I
the
think,
rating industry would help to avoid that
yes,
solution, avoid that
yes,
result. Yeah.
yeah. And so there are many. I mean, there are many pros and cons we can talk about here, where maybe there's some element of free enterprise failure and some element of government failure.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you're not allowed to criticize it, but man, you gotta at least mention this
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
So yeah, just that in 2008.
Mm. Nice.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we went through this because I think that's like very, yeah, explained very clearly, and I think that is quite useful for people to know if they're going to be reading this book as well.
Yeah. So, and I had to do a lot of additional researching and reading while reading this.
Yeah.
I didn't have all these facts at the back of my mind constantly. So yeah, I was just
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
wait, something seems off.
Yeah.
um. Anyway,
Okay.
so should we get back to the text for a bit, maybe?
Yeah. Let's get back to the text.
I think there's one real. I'm gonna skip a bunch of the stuff about like 2008 that we just kind of talked about.
hmm
Um. So. I think we have to talk about the Richard Wolff's discussion of communism in the 20th century.
Mm.
Because he without giving any specific quote, although I can look some up if you want, the argument presented is that capitalism is when the uh, the worker and the owner of the means of production are not the same.
Yeah.
So by that definition, he says socialism, socialist and communist society in the 20th century, so all the horrible ones, Mao, Stalin, like Russia,
Yeah.
Cambodia, list goes on. But actually, that's also capitalism, is his big point, right?
Yeah.
So he says all those millions of deaths, not only am I not gonna ever in this book be like mention them, but I'm just gonna say that all the failures of socialism, they're actually the failures of capitalism. So fuck you.
Okay. Yeah.
Which I mean, that's such a like rhetorical. I don't even know. Yeah. Do you have anything?
I I thought. Hang on. Okay, let's track back. All of the failed socialist projects were actually state capitalist projects. Is what you're talking about him saying? Or
Yes.
right? Okay. Yeah. I mean, you know, yeah. I mean, especially
I
because
mean,
like, so he talks about this like rhetorical thing of like the liberals, like Hayek, right? Like,
mm,
um, describing state capitalism as socialism. I think that's one of the ways that Hayek frames socialism as not not left wing, not strictly a left wing ideology, but socialism is when the government does stuff, right? To quote Wolff himself, government
mm,
is when
mm, mm.
socialism is when the government is
Exactly.
involved in all sorts of things, including the economy.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but
So he says that like Lenin and whatever the as he calls them the state capitalists, they appropriated the means of production.
yes, yeah.
And so he says there's in principle maybe nothing wrong with this, but in effect the workers actually didn't own the means of production
Yeah.
collectively.
Yep.
And this is another
Yes,
thing like
yes. Yeah. Go on.
but he keeps coming back to this fucking collectively word.
Yeah.
Like they have to decide democratically but collectively. And it's like but the whole like does he actually envision this thing where like the janitor owns his own broom and bucket and like
Yeah.
the person sewing to like not sewing, what is the word, the when you put two metal plates together, what the fuck is it called?
Soldering or
Welding,
welding.
something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, no,
Welding.
I'm looking for a different word. Whatever. Welding. The welder actually owns the like machines and everything, and like everyone like brings their own stuff together like a fucking potluck, and now we're gonna have a company.
Yeah.
Like, unless we're in that system where like, it's still capitalism. So that the fact in socialism, the government, quote unquote, thereby collectively owned the means of production.
Well,
That's still capitalism to him because now the government is just a capitalist.
I do think he's right to say that it's state capitalist, but I don't think it makes a difference. Like, because
Well, if yeah,
he says, and he tries to make this distinction between, like you said, like the reason that they are state capitalist is because the people never actually really collectively owned like the socialist ideal is, right? Instead, it was just
yeah.
an intense concentration of state power over everything. I, you know, so he says that, right? But then, and he recognizes that the failure of these old socialist enterprises is the fact that, according to his, rule of what a successful socialism would be, is that they didn't manage to they didn't create a system. They didn't create an outcome where people, quote unquote, collectively owned the means of production. But his solution is also that, right?
Exactly.
His
Like
solution is state capitalism.
If he
without markets.
If he were to criticize this notion that the word collective basically is bullshit, which I agree with him, if that it was his point, that the government owning the means of production and therefore everyone owns it collectively, that's bullshit. That's just rhetorics. The state does own it, the workers don't own it. Yeah. He's correct in that description. But when it then later comes to his own system and like how to fix capitalism, he still holds on to this like collective parliamentary like representation and like calls it democracy, and you know it would be democratic but parliamentary and collective.
Yeah.
But isn't that the exact same thing?
Yeah, and also, I mean, literally using the government as a tool to enact this system.
Yes.
So whether it's through tax incentives, whether it's through, you know, literally like legislative rules that require business to be like this, tax collection, whatever, right? Yeah, that's huge, I think.
That is huge. And another thing that bothers me about the whole discussion in this book is that the whole time the 2008 crash is basically equivocated to the hundreds of millions of people dying in communism in the 20th century. It's like both capitalism and state capitalism have like showed their failures, and now we need a new thing. It's like he never explicitly says that they're exactly equal, but that's always treated like that. And there's like he never ever mentions that all these socialist regimes killed a lot of people. Like that's never mentioned.
Yeah.
It's just that like they're both. I think the specific phrasing was that they both have stopped becoming ideal models, which is such a Jesus Christ, like, really. So yeah, if at least he was like going full speed against like collectivism and saying Stalinism, that was complete bullshit, that was horrible, that was collectivism, we don't want no collectivism anymore.
Yeah.
And also I don't like crashes, but they're not as bad. But you know, I would be much more on board with this, but I just have a problem how it's discussed, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I have another point. So this is, I'm going back a little earlier in the book actually, before this whole capitalism thing, but he talks about immigration and women in capitalism, and I thought the way in which he talks about this and the way the discussion does not reflect his audience in the same way that the Marx discussion of women was very counter-feminism. It's actually so funny. It's actually so funny. So I'm gonna read a couple quotes from page 43.
Okay, yeah.
A new wave of immigration into the United States, this time mostly from Latin America, especially Mexico and Central America. Once again, capitalism's uneven development drove mass worker immigration from these areas, and for many, the United States was the most attractive destination. Okay, first of all, here's already the admission that where it's more capitalism, it's better. But also, the point of more women, and this is also my criticism of conservatism, is the argument of more women and more immigrants joining the labor force and thereby reducing labor demand and thereby depressing wages is, in the case of immigrants, bullshit. In the case of women, maybe has some credibility, and here's why. So, immigrants, like if you say we're going to add 10 people to a population of 15 and therefore wages are depressed, that only makes sense if you legislate those people to be like legally unable to start businesses. But you know, it's like saying if the birth rate goes up, the wages are going to go down. Like, what the fuck are you saying?
Right.
Like, and you're just adding new people to the economy, and those new people could equally be business employers or employees.
Yeah, you're making them only work because they're not citizens.
Yeah,
You're only allowing
and
them
it's
to work.
sometimes very rarely the case. But if you look at any, and especially in the United States, but almost in every single country, if you look at immigrants' representation as entrepreneurs versus natives, immigrants are almost more likely in every country to be entrepreneurs than native population.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is because they have this like nothing to lose, I gotta make it pressure, and
Yeah.
even if it's just like a corner store, a very like, I mean, in the UK, you got all your immigrant like little shops and everything, and I fucking love that. That's great.
Yeah.
But so this whole thing of immigrants, depressing wages, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, this is like quite an old socialist idea, I think, right? Like, I think even Bernie Sanders held this view at some point. This, like, anti-immigration, and unions also, like, historically were kind of protectionist. I mean, you still get that in Japan today as well, of course, but
in the case of women, he actually has somewhat more of a point. I don't have data on this because I don't care that much, but generally, as far I've done like a 10-minute Google search, but generally women are less represented in entrepreneurs than men.
right.
And you can say that there are like patriarchal discrimination reasons for that, and maybe there are, I don't know, but it's just a matter of the facts, if that is true. And also you could say that if there's like a liability of women becoming pregnant and leaving the job environment, they're probably looking only for a job for a couple of years and maybe not to start a business on the whole. So I can see how that makes more sense than the immigrant argument. But yeah.
More sense.
More sense that women adding to the labor force would drive down wages.
Oh, okay. I mean, either way, it's like it's also just kind of like, so what,
Exactly,
like,
and that's
so what
such
if more
fun.
women are working like this. This is definitely not a bad thing. Like,
Yeah, and
like
it's such a
in terms of, and you mentioned Marx as well. Like,
yeah.
like the fact that women are being used in the workforce is detrimental to the family unit because women essentially need to be caregivers. Therefore, that whole kind of like idea, which is just
and it also
redundant.
depresses wages for the workers.
Yeah.
And so
it's the spin that it's actually the evil capitalist that's like, forcing these things to happen. And I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just a very funny parallel there between Marx and Wolff. Both,
Right.
I think their main audience is like feminist Marxists, but the argument is that capitalism is bad because they add women to the workforce.
Yeah.
I have a couple more on this part. So going on quoting, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, which President Clinton signed in 1994, facilitated U.S.-based multinationals' exports into investments in Mexico. This destroyed the livelihoods of millions of Mexicans, especially farmers and small shopkeepers, who faced unspeakable economic hardship unless they emigrated. I mean, this is just like a classic anti-free trade view, which is like, you can say that there are these kind of negatives to free trade, but it's not, essentially then you're just saying that consumers ought not to decide where to buy their own stuff.
Right.
Like, if American businesses can feed Mexicans better than Mexican businesses can, who the fuck is Richard Wolff to come in and say, no, you Mexicans, I know you would like to feed your families, but that's evil capitalism. You have to pay a higher price for food in your country so they can produce food less efficiently in your own country. That just doesn't, it's like not super intuitive to me.
I'm in two minds, to be honest.
And he says NAFTA, just finishing.
Yeah.
He says NAFTA's benefits accrued to a tiny elite of Mexican employers, whereas its huge costs were more democratically
Mexican
distributed. Yes. And the obvious point is that no, the benefits were distributed to the Mexican
Right,
consumers.
right, right. Yeah.
Everyone except the producers. So the argument is always we have to protect our farmers, we have to protect our blah blah blah. But yeah, essentially you're saying we have to artificially make everyone pay more for stuff so that this tiny group that we're gonna quote
Yeah, I
unquote
see what you're
protect so
saying.
they vote for us. Like
Yeah.
it's I don't know. It's to
I see. It's
to
the
like
opposite,
blatantly
right?
say to blatantly say that the benefits accrue to a tiny elite. It's so opposite.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
if
I see what you're saying.
yeah. And if you don't want to buy the other food that you're now allowed to buy, you don't have to.
But I guess as well, that the it's not, isn't it true that um, you know, these small businesses will be forced to raise their prices to exist at the same rate that they're doing the same thing that they're currently doing. So it's not just, you can go with this more expensive option, but it's more that you can go with
Well, with
this
this more
option which
cheaper
is
option.
getting increasingly more expensive. No, I'm talking about if you were someone in Mexico during this time, you have the option of
Hmm.
going for the cheap American option, or you have the option of going to the well, in the beginning you have the option of going to the option within your own country,
Yeah.
and then you are given a cheaper option. And as the cheaper option becomes more and more popular and takes
Hmm.
more customers away from the original uh, domestic option, that
Hmm.
domestic option becomes more expensive. It becomes
No.
less capable to meet the needs of
It it
people.
has it has to become cheaper or it goes out of business.
No, but that's my point, right? Like, because I think what normally happens is that it's like a mom and pop business. Like the way that the means that they try to combat this are, they either have to fire their staff, or they have to reduce the hours that they work, or they have to come up with some kind of innovation, or they raise the prices of their goods. And that's why supermarkets are cheaper, right? That's not
Right,
why
but if
supermarkets are
they're
cheaper, but my point is that, like, over time, unless the domestic option can innovate wildly, they're doomed, right?
yeah, and that's good.
But my point is, though, that it's not, you know, you said if you want to just buy the more expensive option, you can buy it. But my point is that
No, I said that if you want to buy the cheaper foreign option,
no, 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 I
you can
know.
do that.
But you
Oh,
also
okay,
said
but
that
yeah, okay,
if
okay,
you
okay.
wanted
Yeah,
to
yeah,
support
sure, sure.
Mexican businesses, you can do that, right?
Sure. Yes, sure.
But
Yes.
if the Mexican option is getting increasingly more expensive,
I don't
then,
think that's true at all. I think that it's gonna. I mean, that does not make sense to me.
well,
If they're under pressure from foreign competition to lower prices, why do they increase prices? I don't know.
they
They're going
it's
out of
not
businesses
yeah,
because they're
yeah,
too
yeah, yeah.
expensive.
My
So
my point
why
is
are they getting more expensive?
my point is that they would probably go out of business before that would happen, but obviously they're incentivized to make prices cheaper. But if they're
Hmm.
getting less customers, then they have no way of achieving the same amount of money as they would before, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing that you could conceivably do is to increase the amount of money that it costs to do something.
You could increase the price, but
Obviously, it would
that's
be a
just gonna
terrible
put you out of
decision.
business. Just put you out of business even quicker, no?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I know that, but my point is that it's not that it gets exponentially worse as time goes on, right? Unless you are able to find some kind of solution.
Yeah, unless you're able to, produce better and more
Yeah,
efficiently.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, you know, if we talk about like the impact, the cultural impact of capitalism, um, I don't know. I'm in two minds about it because, like, I do think that there's a huge amount of value in small businesses that it's easy to. obviously, I agree with the idea that, like, it would be very unfair to force people to only be able to buy certain kinds of things,
Mm.
especially if they are motivated by some kind of state nationalistic idea about what a culture should be, for example,
And it
and
also depresses innovation.
yeah, of course, like Japan is a good example, a really good example, and we could talk about
Yeah.
like food culture as one part of that. Like, the demand, well, not the demand, the emphasis on domestic goods is so like intrinsic here,
Mm.
and like there's such heavy restrictions on agriculture imports in Japan,
Yeah.
and restrict your options. You can't get certain kinds of foods ever at all anywhere in Japan,
Mm.
um, for the reason that the government has decided that this is something that we won't allow, and a lot of it seems to be at least like partly motivated by this idea of what what Japan is, and like what its cultural identity is. And
Well, I think that's yeah.
I've always really, really hated this idea of like a top-down institution telling people and informing them through education what a country stands for, or what you as a citizen of this country should be like, or what your likes should be.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that's just a scapegoat explanation to make people go along with it. The real reason is that the farmers get fat subsidies and then they vote for the LDP. That's why they don't allow it.
yeah.
And then they have to have some reason to justify it, so they dream up this bullshit about like food culture or whatever.
hmm
I don't think the genuine reason is that.
Well,
But
I think
your point still stands.
but I think we're at a point now where people don't actually, they
Yeah.
don't actually realize that they're being deceitful. I think, like,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
people just
Absolutely.
are
Yeah.
born and
Yeah.
raised with it. So,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
at the same time, I love culture. I love culture when I know, or when I feel that the culture is actually come from people getting together and people sharing things, and where it doesn't feel like it's something you read in an encyclopedia about that country or whatever, where it's
Mm.
something that you know and I guess it's kind of hard to say whether it is or it isn't sometimes, but um you know I don't know. I feel a little bit more conflicted about that idea. I don't think the solution is to restrict people's options at all, but I do think
Yeah.
that uh it's true that culturally, like, uh free trade can have a big impact on the culture of like specific areas. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I would totally agree with that. I mean, it goes back to policy versus what is right. So
Yes. Yeah.
I certainly don't believe in restricting anyone's purchasing options, but that doesn't mean that I personally believe
Yeah.
that you should always buy the cheapest garbage you can.
Yeah.
Like, and if you look at, I think a lot of people also personally in the libertarian movement are also huge proponents of personally having a little garden where they produce their own tomatoes and shit, and buying
Yeah.
locally and bios and this and that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's not like I'm advocating for free trade, and also if you're a good person, you buy at Walmart.
hmm Yeah.
No, I
And
totally agree with that.
and that's a big connection between I think a lot of leftists and libertarians. This, like,
Yes.
it's not just it's not that culture doesn't exist, or it's not that this, like, it's this, like, a thing that has no value, and it's not that, like, the only thing that's really important is money, or like
Mm.
or like certain ways that we value things, like how cheap it is, for example, um, and that there are some things that um, I don't know. I mean, maybe you could say that if you like a bar, for example, if you like a cafe or something, there's a lot of cafes here which are very slow, and they make, like, takes you 30 minutes to get a coffee or something, but you know, you like the
Mm.
atmosphere, you like going there to study or whatever. So, and it's local and you get to speak to the owner and stuff. So you don't mind paying, you know, however much money it is for coffee every now and then.
Yeah, and I would say that the bio foods and like locally produced, free range, whatever,
Yeah.
that appealing that kind of stuff to customers has actually been a huge industry in free market
Right.
enterprises. So I don't have the data on this, but this whole buying locally kind of stuff, I think, is,
Yeah.
you know, it's not that capitalists and people who have money are, you know, happy to buy the cheapest food and the most efficient produced food and whatever, but there's a huge industry that has spontaneously attracted customers throughout without using force, you know. So yeah.
And as well as that, like to top that off, I think as well, people who are interested in those kinds of products or services recognize that they are products or services that, you know, they don't buy them because they're looking for a deal, or because they're looking for something cheap. They buy them because they connect with what it stands for, or, you know, it does something different for them. And so people, you know, so people will spend more money on something like that because they know that a supermarket can't give the same thing. And, you know, sometimes you see that in supermarkets, and we're getting a bit off topic, but like, you know, you see supermarkets sometimes try and copy like the aesthetic of like whole food things or like biofoods or whatever, like this like farm to table kind of idea or whatever. And, you know, that works for them to an extent, but I think people also recognize when it's really genuine and when it's not as well. Yeah. There's actually a rice producer I was learning about in Nagano, I think, and they only sell to Michelin restaurants in Japan. And
I bet they're still cashing those subsidies, though.
I think they actually don't.
Okay, maybe not.
No, I think they actually don't receive subsidies, but and that's.
But I think the price of rice in all of Japan is so there's like the government actually
But they
decides the price of rice.
But they that's if you sell on the market, but they don't sell on the market.
Right.
They sell direct to consumers, to restaurants. So they're outside of the unions or.
If outside of you, okay.
If they were inside the unions, they would be forced to. They only produce rice once a year, as opposed to other producers, which generally produce twice a year. And so there's, because of the amount of labor, he was saying it basically costs them like 4 times as much to make the same kind of rice. And but they navigate this, and it's not an easy situation, but they navigate this by dealing with these clients that are willing to spend more money because, you know, not only do they have a guarantee that this is like a premium rice product, but the customers who dine at those restaurants can also, like, they connect with that whole story, right? And it's like part of what they sell is this story. These rice producers, they do this, they do that, blah 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 blah. You know. Great.
Okay. Good. Point. I want to briefly talk about
page 26.
I want to briefly talk about the whole women thing a bit more because on page 46 he also talks about how because of capitalism there is I'm gonna just read to you my notes word for word.
Okay.
So this is what I wrote down, not thinking that this would be word for word, right? But whatever. The mental gymnastics of Wolff blaming divorce rates rising on capitalism is hilarious. His logic: stagnant wages lead to women start working. I thought leftists like this. Lead to less time for women to hold the household together, lead to divorce. So this is his explanation of why divorce rate's going up because of capitalism. Instead
Birth
of
rate's going down, you mean?
divorce rate
Divorce
going
rate's
up.
going up, right?
Yeah. Instead of leftist culture and politics advocating for polyamorous relationships, demonizing the nuclear family, financially incentivizing divorce through alimony and child payments, especially targeted at black community. So, like, the whole political left has had a decades-long campaign against the nuclear family, against all this like patriarchy, blah blah blah, and now it's Richard Wolff coming out here and be like, actually, divorce rate going up. Sucks, eh? Fuck those capitalists, am I right? Like, this just seems so out of sync with his audience. I don't even know. And like, and one of my least favorite points, especially also in this Japanese whole population decline debate, is that poverty does not increase divorce. Anywhere in the world, if you order by country, and if you look within any country and you order by financial stratum, the poorer people are, the more they are married and the more children they birth. This is just like a constant fact. And so this continuous leftist insistence that we need to subsidize childcare and we need to give people more and more handouts because they're not having children because they're too poor. It's just so opposite of anything the data tells us.
Well, yeah, like Sweden is like a good example, right? They have a lot of you get like a whole care package when you have children, and they have lots of legislation regarding like maternity and paternity leave and lots of guarantees and stuff, but the birth rates have not increased as a result, I don't think.
Yeah, so it makes sense in theory, but it's just going against the general trend.
Yeah.
And
also
the one thing you
generally as well, like, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, like, you're not gonna be poorer than your great grandfather or your great grandparents, but they somehow managed to do something.
Exactly.
I was thinking about this recently, and I think also part of it is to do with like, and I won't hang on this, but like the sense of responsibility about raising children as well, and the sense of obligation to, especially in Japan, get into a good school and get lots of education and don't be a failed parent, don't have a failure of a child. And but I think in a freer society, there would be many more options rather than just going to university in order to get a high-paying job,
Yes.
And so
I totally agree.
The whole like dual employment system in Japan, where you're either fully employed or you're a part-timer / contract worker, which is much less stable and much lower paying. The difference there is like, can you get your child through university? Can you motivate them to do all the bullshit testing and shit to get into some bullshit company where they will be miserable and have to navigate this terrible age-based hierarchy, where they have very little autonomy or freedom to actually be rewarded for the effort or innovation that they bring to a company. Yeah, I wouldn't want to have kids here. No.
Yeah, I was thinking about the education system in Japan and how it kills any individuality and creativity. I was like, I'm not sending my kids to school in Japan if I have one. And probably also, homeschooling either way. But
yes, and then it's like the alternative is like international school or something, and then at that point I feel like, I don't know, you want people to feel like they're part of society, I guess, or you want people to be able to interface with other people and like have some real life experiences, not just be kind of like in some.
Okay, we're getting off topic.
Yeah,
but
I know.
I want to get back to there. One more quote about the women. Um, um, right. So, page 46. Quote: Women's former household labor, such as shopping, cooking, cleaning, and repairing clothes, appliances, and furniture, was increasingly replaced by purchasing substitute commodities. On
Yeah.
U.S. television programs, situational comedies changed from celebrating the happy nuclear and patriarchal family of the 1950s and 60s to laughing with compassion at the increasingly dysfunctional families of the last several decades. The pornography industry grew fastest of all. Bro, you are missing your target audience, my dude. Welcome to the Trump National Convention. Like what? I mean, he's not wrong, but my dude, like a historically unprecedented and growing proportion of the population began choosing not to get married. Yeah, it's almost like people on your side told them not to for ages and demonized marriage. Like, what? Dude. I mean, how is this? It's like this goes completely against everything else we stand for. But let's sneak this in here because we can kind of blame capitalism on it, maybe.
No, I don't think this is. I don't think he's. I think he's being honest here. He is 82. Like he's old as fuck.
He's married to a radical feminist.
Mm.
I don't. Has she read? I don't think she read this.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. It's just this very weird thing that sometimes comes up with Marxists and Marx himself, where it's just like, whoa, how is this? Like we're arguing for patriarchy now, and women fixing the furniture. Like,
exactly. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
Like, okay. So yeah, that's just that.
Yeah, it feels like very like middle of the road, like statement, and I don't know why you would really bring something like that up. And also, it's like society changes, like things change, like I like I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Another part is page 49. Workers experienced physical exhaustion from added paid labor, emotional and psychological stresses from changing labor and gender roles. Yeah. I don't know why he puts these kind of parts in, like changing gender roles, which he blames on women in the workplace, which he blames on capitalism. He says leads to workers' emotional and psychological stress. I mean, your audience is gonna come for you, my dude. Like, really? Like, we're gonna make this argument. Gender roles are stressing out the workers emotionally.
Well, exactly, and this goes back to his whole thing. It's like, he was talking about slaves earlier.
Yeah.
Like, if we want to talk about someone who's chained to the kitchen sink, like, yeah, you should stay there actually because it's far too psychologically discomforting for you to have any financial or like personal liberty. What are you talking about? I mean,
Okay.
of course, like things change, and of course, like, that's stressful and whatever. But I don't know. You can also. I mean, I think he's maybe he's talking about this like lack of a sense of there being an option. If you feel like you have to, both parents have to work, in order to manage a household. But as you like described earlier, according to people like Rothbard, this is not a symptom of capitalism itself, but it's a symptom of the state capitalism crony thing, right? And that I mean, you can kind of picture it. Like, is it completely like impossible to envision some kind of like capitalist society where you have the freedom to stay at home if you want, and maybe if you don't, then I don't know.
Yeah, and he always uses capitalism as like a description of the. Sorry, I think we're talking over each other.
I'm not talking.
Oh, okay. My internet was making weird noises. He always uses capitalism to describe this kind of system of, free enterprise and government. But then he defined capitalism earlier simply as the someone owning capital and employing a worker, and the worker not owning that capital. That was simply his definition.
Right.
And like that's simply saying that private property may freely exist. So when he is talking about capitalism, he is talking about, according to his definition, simply free enterprise and private property.
Yeah.
So, but then he always makes it seem like there's this system, and so this is page 52, quote, "Capitalism drives workers and capitalists to play the roles assigned to them by the system." I fucking hate this. Capitalism drives workers and capitalists to play the roles assigned to them by the system. I hate this idea that there's like some entity called capitalism influencing people, and it's what they do. It's really at the core of his kind of critique. But capitalism, by his definition, is just what you get when you don't force people to do things against their will. That's really all there is to it. If you don't force people to do things they otherwise wouldn't want to do, that's capitalism. That's it. It's just free enterprise. You just get to do what you want. There is no system. The only system there is what government sets up.
Yeah.
And so, quote again, "Capitalism also assigns the state its role in supporting and undergirding certain activities, regulating other activities, and preventing certain excesses. State officials perform these functions just as workers and employers perform theirs." Yeah, wrong. Capitalism isn't some entity assigning anyone anything. The state is always a reduction of capitalism. As the more state you have, the less capitalism you have. The state isn't just people performing their. This is like some Judith Butler shit now. They just perform their roles like the workers do. They force others to do things they otherwise wouldn't want to do. That is the definition of what the state does. And so I feel like on just a language level, it's so completely painting a wrong picture of what's actually happening.
Yeah. Good points.
Okay.
We're 30% in.
I'm actually more than half through my notes, so.
Okay.
Yes. Where should we? I'm skipping a couple of these.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to bring up from this point?
No. I'm pretty happy with what we've talked about here, for sure. I think, I mean, this is all the criticism of his characterization of the history of capitalism in America.
Yeah. Yeah, so on page 76, 75, he again kind of puts his own ideas forward. And so one thing he says is to nationalize all the banks, because they would be more efficient than private banks.
Yeah.
Also that private employment fails to defeat unemployment, so we need government employment. I mean, I can't. Should I just repeat everything we've said so far?
No, I think we can move on. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So this whole state capitalism thing, just to bring a little quote. Sometimes the reaction to and critique of private capitalism in more severe and longer-lasting economic downturns produce as a transition beyond regulated private capitalism to a form of state capitalism That happened in Russia after 1917 and in several other countries after the Great Depression and since. Yeah, I mean, if you're really gonna come out here and say, remember what the Russians did in 1917 with the whole communist stuff and Lenin and Stalin? Yeah, crazy, those capitalists, am I right? I mean, literally, who are you addressing? Like, is anyone? Yes. Again, state capitalism provoked crises much as private capitalism did. The shape and management of the crisis differed within the two kinds of capitalism, just as they differed between more and less regulated private capitalism. Yeah, that's a very nice way to brush 100 million corpses, surveillance, terror, and constant lying and poverty under the table by simply saying that state capitalism and private capitalism had about the same amount of crises.
Yeah.
Like, no. Like, literally by what metric?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to skip over this whole part. Okay, finally, we're going to get to a bit of his, like, part of the enablers. I think we left that off and didn't come back to it.
We did, yes.
So he says, each productive worker is an equal member of the board in WSDEs. The collective of such workers constitutes the board. Enablers include the secretaries, clerks, receptionists, security guards, cleaning staff, and so on, who maintain the paperwork and physical spaces that provide the necessary conditions for the first group of workers to produce a surplus. Other types of enablers include managers, lawyers, architects, and counselors who provide still other conditions. Okay, point being, each productive worker is an equal member of the board. Enablers are blah, blah, blah. So if you're an enabler, you're not producing the surplus. So sorry, you are maybe included in some way, but you're not actually an equal member of the owner of the company.
You're as equal as they deem you to be.
Yeah, so it's like he says multiple times, they're both equally important for the businesses. But the producers are just a little bit more equal.
Well, the thing is, I don't even know how this is necessary. I don't even understand how this is relevant or necessary to within his own logic. Like,
no, it's absolutely crucial to his whole logic, because in his logic, only the immediate producers are allowed to own the means of production. If anyone else other than the immediate producers own the means of production, then it's capitalism. That's his definition. And by that definition, he upholds that Stalinism is capitalism and that Maoism is capitalism, because the immediate people working in the steel factory, they don't own the company. So by that's his whole point. So if he doesn't uphold this very strict definition of if you're not immediately producing, you may not own the company, then the whole definition of his, like, cure of capitalism falls apart.
Because if they did own, then they would be, it would be in their interest to wrangle it out of the hands of the producers. Yeah, or not even going that far, but simply, but simply if someone who is not an immediate producer of the surplus, as he calls it, or Marx call it, then if anyone else owns the means of production except the immediate producer of the surplus, he's a capitalist. Yeah.
And we can't have that now, can we?
Right.
So I think it does kind of seem like, why is he so insistent on this? But it is kind of central to the whole thing, I think.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Which also, I mean, it's like, raises the question, like, who's going to be your lawyer? Like, who's going to want to do that? Yeah. And, like, are you going to pay them less then? Like, well, I don't know. Yeah. So, and on page 130, it says, however, this is a key consideration that does not require
excluding the enablers from full democratic participation with the surplus producers in deciding the size and specific distribution of the surplus. Note those words. Deciding the size and specific distribution of the surplus. The power to decide the size and distribution of the surplus is democratically shared by all of the workers in a WSDE.
Yeah.
The physical process of appropriating and distributing the surplus are reserved for the subset of surplus producing workers. This is so confusing. So he says the immediate producers are the only ones entitled to the physical process of appropriating and distributing the surplus, but the process of deciding the size and specific distribution of the surplus is everyone can participate.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Why?
Yeah, why? And also, how is deciding the specific distribution of the surplus and deciding the physical distribution of the surplus, how is that different?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, no, that Producers of the surplus be identical to the appropriators and distributors.
So I think you're probably reading this part right now.
Yeah,
but,
no, I have it up. I'm just trying to make sense of it.
It feels like he wrote the intro and then the conclusion, and then in the middle he was like, ChatGPT, fill it in.
Yeah.
Make it make sense. I don't know. There's another part I want you to read unless you want to add something onto this right now.
I just want to say that I would really like to understand what this means.
The point is that it doesn't actually mean anything.
And also as well, so going back to your point, how you clarified that for me earlier. The reason that the enablers are not given full keys to the car is because this would cross the line of full ownership by producers.
Yeah.
But size and specific distribution, I mean,
because enablers includes the managers and stuff, right?
Yeah. Like, I'm just trying to think like how.
So let's think about a specific product. Let's say a Big Mac.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the person who puts the tomato on the Big Mac, they are included in deciding deciding the size and specific distribution of the surplus. So by surplus he means the profit of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put the tomato on the Big Mac, then you are allowed to decide how much profit you're making off that Big Mac and specific distribution. And what you're going to do with that profit.
Yeah.
So if you're going to hire more people, you're going to, But if you are cleaning the toilets in the background, then you're not allowed to do that because then you would be a capitalist.
Wait, hang
on.
And does not require.
You would, however, be included in the physical process of appropriating and distributing. Okay, so physical. Wait. So
this is the other way. It's the other way around now. The power to decide the size and distribution of the surplus is democratically shared by all of the workers.
Yeah.
The physical processes of appropriating.
Oh, sorry. You're right. You're right.
The guy putting the tomato on can decide the physical processes of appropriating and distributing the surplus. The janitor is limited to helping to decide the size and specific distribution of the profits, the surplus.
I mean, what?
Why those things? Like, is he just trying to get
Yeah.
them involved? Is this like all he can give? Like, and the chapter just ends then, basically,
Yeah.
and there's
I mean,
no explanation of why these things specifically. It doesn't
I mean,
seem
you would
obvious to
think,
me what, like,
yeah, you would think that the physical process is actually a lower substrata because,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, isn't it making the decision more powerful than like physically carrying it out? Like, I don't.
Well, and, to be fair, maybe that's the point, right? It's like maybe he just. Hmm.
I don't know. Um,
Just
two
imagining like a
pages.
company that gets
Yeah.
infiltrated by janitors. Just decide we need the floors cleaned all the time.
I mean, honestly, no, I was thinking about in his later proposals about specific laws. I was thinking that isn't that exactly what happened? Like, you would get a bunch of low life. I'm not to say janitors are low lives, but yeah, like you would get a bunch of people with like lower skills flooding a company, and by their like democratically elected, if they're in the majority now, then they can say that they should get most of the spoils,
Right.
and I don't know, get a new employee lounge or whatever.
And they,
But the managers or lawyers who are not in the majority,
yeah,
they're gonna get less pay now.
yeah. And when that company inevitably fails, they don't give a fuck because
They
there's a
just
whole system that will put them somewhere else.
exactly, they just clean toilets somewhere else.
I'm liking the sound of
um,
this already.
um,
Can
I want you to read a somewhat lengthy paragraph, 2 pages from this part,
you give
which
me the
starts with the word a specialized agency.
okay. Agents.
132 on my pages.
Yeah. A specialized agency would need to be established that would immediately. Oh, yeah, yeah. A specialized agency would need to be established that would immediately swing into action upon learning of an enterprise considering a labor saving technical change. It would always know, from constant monitoring, which existing enterprises need more laborers, which have registered that wish to commence new production, all the relevant skill and experience requirements, and where affected laborers and enterprises are located. Rather, like a matchmaking service, this agency's task would be to match employees willing to change jobs with job availability and to arrange for appropriate training and inducements to facilitate the reallocation of personnel. No loss of income would attend the transition period for workers who left one job for another. To run this agency would cost a small portion of all the surpluses distributed by WSDEs to sustain its staff and activities. This agency's reports and services would form one basis for the decision by all workers about whether to make the technical change in question.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes. I wrote below this, haha, GG, unrelated to your idea and simply government planning of employment. I mean, yeah, we should have an agency that decides whether we should have technological progress or not, and to match all the employees to the companies.
And yeah, I mean, at this point as well, you're also saying like you're you're saying that there has to be a specialist authority above you which may limit what you are capable of doing as a company.
Hmm. Constantly monitoring.
Constantly monitoring, that's one thing, but also just like this whole great like, you know, I don't know. I mean, my like what excited me about this idea of like
Hmm.
worker cooperatives is this like idea that, similar to that anarchist farm that I told you about before, right? There's no one above you.
Yeah, yeah.
You're you're all at work, completely responsible for what happens around you. You can utilize all your different skills in different ways. You can decide how to allocate, your different skills, and maybe it probably wouldn't scale, but um, like that's super exciting to me. I like that idea generally, and for him to just be like, oh yeah, and also yeah, we have to have this institution, this bureaucracy, which will monitor and you will need confirmation for whether you decide to integrate a new technology, whether you decide to change your, construct the way that your company works. It's like at that point, you just kind of throw the whole democracy thing out the window, because then it's no longer about what your company wants to do, but it's about what this sneaky little like small paragraph specialized agency.
No, but Nick, they're the collective representation of all the WSDs.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then it's also to run this agency would cost a small portion of all the surpluses distributed by WSDEs. And what happens if you don't
willingly donate to them?
Yeah, and what happens if you don't pay that? What happens if do you have any? Do the WSDEs have any say over how this thing is run? Like,
yeah, right.
It's just so I don't know.
Yeah.
It's so disappointing because it's so. He's just he says it as if it's this is an obvious thing that we would need, and
yeah, he just sneaks it in.
He totally sneaks it in. It's he doesn't even mention it again, I don't think. Or he mentions it so minimally.
I bet if you interviewed him and was what about that technological regulations agency you mentioned in your book? You're like, what? I didn't say that.
Huh?
Oh, I totally forgot I wrote this.
Yeah.
Another interesting part on 159 is, quote, WSDEs need public schools to teach all students how to design and direct large group activities and how to give and receive orders within a community of equals. How to give and receive orders within a community of equals. Yeah, sounds like a fucking nightmare.
Sounds like a kind of contradiction in terms.
Yeah, think back on all those group activities in school where you design a large group activity and give and receive orders within a community of equals. Man, weren't those the best time of school?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who loves a group project?
Yeah.
And I just think generally that I don't know, you sometimes see videos online of they might be Japanese schools, I think mainly Chinese schools, kids doing
basketball kids.
Yeah. It's some cooperative activities and stuff, and it's this is how we instill cooperation in children and stuff, and it's people fucking love those videos. People love seeing that shit for some reason, and I don't know. I just always feel weird about this idea that we have to instill this because what if you fail, and what if this isn't something that you're good at doing, or this isn't something you like to do? What if you can still be valuable without necessarily being able to interface with other people socially in a perfect way?
Yeah.
And
I forgot the exact quote from the Fountainhead, but there was something about the government board and Rourke saying decisions or creation is never made in a group setting. It's always one guy leading everything and everyone else just nods along.
Sure.
And that is literally every group project I've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. No, I agree. I think a lot of people watch those videos also in horror but amusing themselves. How fucking scary it is.
Yeah, no, for sure. It is also I feel like it's so telling of what kind of person you are. Some people it's almost I don't know. I mean, you get people like that with Japan as well. And they're oh, it's so orderly. It's so it's Okay.
Well, it's nice if they voluntarily come together and do something orderly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
nice.
yeah,
But
for sure.
yeah,
I mean
but
that's the thing. It's like, yeah, this
yeah,
does exist. Cooperation obviously exists, and like a
yeah,
corporation is allows you to do lots of things, and um, but you know, I don't know.
yeah.
I don't like basketball.
Me neither. I want you to read um what's that Richard Wolff quote where he says that capitalism drives the black folks into basketball, and that's why.
What?
No,
Uh,
it's I'm making a fake quote like with the women,
oh, okay.
where he misses his target audience. Anyway, um, I page 164. That's not going to mean anything to you. The quote is the governing principle should be.
Okay.
And from there to governing bodies.
Yeah. The governing principle should be that residents and workers participate in each other's decisions to the extent that each is affected by the other's decisions. If residents are organized in a representative democracy, their representatives should participate in directing the WSDEs with which they are interdependent. Likewise, all the workers within a WSDE should themselves, or via representatives, participate in the decisions taken by residents-based governing bodies.
Okay, so what I wrote in my notes to this is basically a complete bureaucratic nightmare, impossible to administer, where everyone has to participate in politics all the time. Also, how do you instate this system? People don't just do this by themselves if you leave them alone. So you also need an overarching body that makes sure that everyone is properly participating in democracy. And how again is this not leading to a totalitarian state? Also, if you force local residents and other stakeholders, is it stakeholders? What is the word? Yeah,
Yeah,
stakeholders, right? Yeah, to have a say in the company, even if they're not working in the company. Like, actually, big and profitable companies would simply pay them off or relocate to wherever they are left alone the most.
yeah,
Like, if Elon Musk's puts up a new Tesla factory, the idea that because now there's like noise pollution, that all the neighbors are now on the board of Tesla or have like ownership in the company, like what?
yeah. Well, it wouldn't
I mean,
achieve his goal of equality.
yeah,
It would, we would. I mean, it's just like today. It's like go to a place where there's lower taxes.
yeah, or but even if we take this concept
No,
at
no,
face value,
yeah,
like really, like all this in who the fuck decides where the cutoff threshold is for like government being involved in the company and the company and government and the residents association and all this.
right,
I
right,
mean,
right,
it's
right.
this is just gonna be a huge, like, just the cost of administrating all this bureaucracy. It's gonna be impossible. Like,
And also at that point, it's like, yeah, you as a resident now have the responsibility of being involved with however many companies there are that exist where you live, and that
yeah,
that could be hundreds, like
yeah,
depending on
yeah,
your
yeah,
how you
absolutely.
decide to cut the cake. And if
And
it's
like,
not hundreds, then it doesn't make any sense.
talk about housing prices going up because of building restrictions. I mean,
Yeah,
Jesus,
yeah,
like this kind of it's gonna be impossible to build a house anywhere. Like, housing prices are gonna go to the roof.
right, right, right.
I
Well, it's
mean,
kind of
it's not
like,
even pun intended or not. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like tax in a way, like
Mm.
like the school district system in America and stuff.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like, what would you have a profitable company in one area, and then it's just it's like I don't know, NIMBY shit happening. Like, why would that not happen unless there was
Mm.
some like very strong authority above all of this that would prevent that from happening, which would probably just completely undermine this whole like guarantee of freedom anyway.
Mm. And I mean, yeah, it's just so much regulation and bureaucracy involved here. I don't like how is this going to be coordinated at all?
Yeah, right.
I okay.
And then also having actual government elections.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, there's going to be so many elections. Every day is
Yeah.
going to be election. Um, so
How many
also,
janitors? It's the how many janitors
yeah.
election again? It's the
No, the
third
janitor
time
like
this week.
no.
Last
How
week it
many
was Burger King.
tomatoes should we put on the burger? I call snap elections.
We did a very good job of, I think, um, it's been like however many hours we've been doing this now, and we're
Yeah.
falling apart now, but I think we've done very well so far.
Yeah, I've got only a couple more points, but we're gonna
Yeah,
wrap this up very soon.
yeah,
So I want you to recall the whole backdrop of him being on the like Occupy Wall Street side and against corporate bailouts and everything. So now on page 76, I quote, learning from and adapting the example of Italy's very successful 1985 Marcora law, which enabled workers to take over enterprises that were in crisis, the US government could offer unemployed workers here a similar choice. Quote, instead of a period of receiving regular unemployment payments, they could choose to get the total of such payments in advance as initial capital for a WSDE. The condition would be that they find a group of other employed people willing to make the same choice and pool the funds for the WSDE. First of all, in this like Morocco law where workers take over failed companies, this is bailouts. This is literally corporate bailouts.
right,
Except that the people who get the money are now the workers instead of the owners.
right,
But this
right,
is
right,
literally corporate bailouts. So, I mean,
right.
the incentive structure here is not changed at all. And then about
Yeah,
the whole employment thing, I mean that shit is just hilarious. Yeah, people on welfare are gonna pool their checks to start a communally owned business.
yeah,
Forgot to mention how we all paint and eat grapes in the end, but um, yeah, I mean these socialist types never think about incentives, which shows how little they understand about economics or human action, as Ludwig von Mises called it. I mean, this kind of program sends a very clear message to the workers. If we can manage the company into the ground and fuck everyone over, say like Lehman
right.
Brothers or something,
Yeah,
then the government will step in, give us a fat wad of cash, and transfer ownership of the company to us. Not only does this not is this not an argument against corporate bailouts, in that this doesn't punish bad behavior, that still applies, right?
yeah,
Now we're actually incentivizing workers to ruin the company so they can get ownership. I mean, how is that not the incentive structure? How is that not the incentive structure?
right. Yeah,
I don't know. So
yeah. It's pretty atrocious. I will also say as well, I think at the beginning of the book, he. This is another thing that I read and I was like, you know, I felt it was a very strange decision, but he made like the express decision in the beginning to like he was like, I'm not gonna mention any existing worker cooperatives,
mm.
and he never never actually explained why. Gonna try and find the quote. Um,
Okay, while you do that,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll I'll add on to this like thing we just read. Quote, no doubt new WSDEs enabled by some adaptation of a Marcora style law would require all sorts of government support. These might include, for example, technical assistance, subsidized or guarded credit access, temporary tax exemptions, preferential purchasing of WSDE goods and services by government agencies, and so on. I mean, Jesus. Could you set up the incentive structure any more towards failure and corruption? Like,
Yeah.
goddamn, dude.
Um,
Like, this kind of intermarriage between state and enterprise, on an Italian model, by the way, in a highly regulated way. It has a name. What was it? Oh yeah, it's called fascism.
Yeah. I can't find this quote, but I mean, firstly, you know, like he said that he wasn't going to discuss. It's like this book is not going to be a discussion of existing worker co-ops or existing like enterprises. My first question is like, why?
Because they're all failures.
Right? Like,
We're not going to provide any evidence that does not
it,
argue for us.
this just felt like I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really like went like was reading this book with a very open mind. I was really like
Yeah.
really
I
wanted
didn't pick
to.
up on that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, and but when I saw that, and because I'm like fairly familiar with him as a public academic at least.
Mm.
When I saw that, like this little, you know, this little light went off in the back of my head, like, and I was like, no, surely he's not being like he is in every single public appearance I've seen him in. Surely he's not just being like, I know this and I know this thing, and if you don't know it, then you're an idiot. In the book about the thing that he's trying to explain. But it's just like,
Right.
and
Yeah.
but then he doesn't even stick to it because then he uses that one. Is that like a Spanish example or something? Like, or is it the Italian
The
example?
Mondragon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Spanish.
It's just like
But he doesn't really explain the example. He just mentioned that it's really good.
exactly, and that's also the thing. It's like, and but the thing is as well, there is like, as far as I know, like there's actually a lot of research about worker co-ops, like, and it's definitely it has been growing because it has been like a of interest to like leftist academics and economists. So it's like there is actually like stuff to draw on here.
Yeah.
And
I mean, look, if you're like wanting to start a farm with your buddies and everyone knows each other and you're all good with each other, like that's great, and I'm all for that. But like if you're talking about like corporate bailouts and like what the fuck, by the way, does it mean to get your unemployment benefits in advance? The whole point is that you get them every month until you find work.
Right.
Like
exactly.
if you find what does it mean if you get them all in advance? Like what?
You get them in advance. Yeah.
For how many years in advance?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Next.
Next. Okay, I have two more points only. One is I don't have a quote for this, but this is 173 toward the end, where Wolff frames the left as enemies of globalism, which he sees as bad. Globalism, that is.
Yeah.
And the right as kind of, capitalists and globalists. I mean, I really wonder if he still holds to that in today's discourse, because it seems to be completely flipped, doesn't it? I mean,
that's kind of not really an acceptable view now.
Yeah, like right populism is completely against globalism, and it's not like the like socialist left is necessarily pushing for globalism, I don't think,
Sure.
but certainly like Joe Biden campaign and everything. So I don't know. Oh boy. So yeah, I haven't checked in on his YouTube account on that recently, but yeah, I can't just like with the COVID thing, I can't imagine that he didn't flip on this.
I mean, the question is like, what's the alternative? Like,
yeah,
are you gonna be happy with closing the borders and denying people certain freedoms just simply based on where they were born and shit like that? But that's not like.
Yeah.
Like
okay.
a leftist would not like accept that. Like, I think most like people have decent common sense. Like, or at least at the very least, like just kind of a generally, open / altruistic, however you want to read that view of like the world.
Well, it's also difficult because we just say globalism and it's not exactly clear what we're talking about. But what you will find,
You can kind of imagine him making the same argument about like monarchy or something. Honestly.
We have to. On that note, we have to read at some point. Hermann Hoppe. Wait, is it Hermann Hoppe? Hans Hoppe? Whatever, Hoppe. We have to read Hoppe.
Okay.
Who is another Austrian guy.
Cool.
And yeah, talking about monarchy and democracy. It was very interesting. Anyway, but yeah, on globalism, so the right current critique would be something like government structures tend to corrupt the larger they get. And so to have global government structures like the WHO and NATO and all these kind of institutions, and especially as we see now with like Ukraine war and as we saw with the WHO during COVID, they are very corrupt, and having bigger and bigger government is not good. So we should have local and state governments so then, and so that would be a kind of more reserved conservative right-wing criticism of globalism, I think. And another part of that is also the immigration thing, of course.
Of course, yeah.
So I think the argument Wolff brought against globalism so far were mostly against free trade.
Yeah,
because
okay.
it's like a capitalism thing. So I don't know how Wolff stands on the whole like world government thing, because that was certainly a like original socialist goal, was it not? That socialism would be kind of a world spanning thing. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about that. Okay, final point is he talks about how the universities are indoctrinating people toward capitalism. I've kind of mentioned this earlier and how I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
And I have a quote here. It's whatever. I'm not going to read it now, but I would say the whole business cycle theory we talked about earlier about central banks and so on. And you see this now with Javier Milei's campaign in Argentina. That is not something that is like if you take an undergrad and a graduate course in economics at a university, well, I can tell you about Japan and probably in the West as well.
Yeah.
But no one will ever teach you the truth about central banking and why there is the business cycle and why there is inflation.
Yeah.
This is just not part of the curriculum, and I think it's very intentional. And instead, you are stuck with mathematical proofs that are completely unapplicable and meaningless, and they simply want you to like become someone. Like if you think about the government incentive of what kind of economists they want to the universities to produce, is they want to have people who can make very complex statistical models that the average person can't understand to then justify more government spending.
Right.
And that's exactly what they're doing. And you will never learn about any of this business cycle stuff we talked earlier in public universities. So
this is also like ironically what I feel like Marx would call the bourgeois science, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's I have an overlap here with Richard Wolff, where I have enormous contempt for the academics, especially in the economic sphere, but for very different reasons than Richard Wolff. So maybe that's my closing thing.
Fair enough.
Do you want to say anything general about the book? I mean, we've touched upon like missing data and everything, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend it. I think I just don't. The reason that I wouldn't is not because I don't think it's not. I think the idea is interesting. I'm not like, I don't know. The devil is in the details with all of this, obviously, and the problem is with this book is that there are no consistent details, and I found myself like, I don't know, I just couldn't trust it. I guess I just can't trust what I'm reading. And I'm not just talking about the factual stuff. I'm not just talking
Mm.
about the how um, honest he's being about representing facts. I'm just talking about the way that he writes. Like,
Yeah.
I don't feel like I really have come away from it with something that I could confidently tell someone else. Um, it just felt mushy, I guess.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, with phrasings were like
the phrasing. Yeah,
the system of capitalism forcing the state workers to perform their part just like the workers in the enterprise. And I
yeah,
mean, yeah, it's just ideological poison at that point. Sorry, but uh,
um,
yeah, I would say, I mean, if you have read other like economic stuff and you're not only reading Richard Wolff, I think it can be helpful to
yeah.
also think about Richard Wolff and
Well, that
what
yeah, yeah,
their what the argument is and
yeah,
understanding the argument and why it's maybe wrong in your opinion or not.
yeah,
But if I yeah, if I had like a friend who is interested in economics and I know I wouldn't give him this book and be like, yeah, start with this.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
I mean, when I said I wouldn't recommend it, I'm talking more about the book as a like text rather than
yeah,
like
as a text, it's also very low quality.
yeah. I think Wolf is worthwhile, very like it's very worthwhile to know who he is and know what he's about.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I want to read something which is less like. I just want to read something which I feel like I'm not being like gaslit when I'm reading it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean,
and
I think it would be interesting to read like an anthropological uh, study of someone who went to a WSDE for a couple months or something, right? That
right,
would
right,
probably
right.
be more informative than this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but we'll never have them. So, um, you know, again, I can appreciate that, you know, we have things that we consider important and precious, and that we want to build societies in the direction that we, want to live, and that sometimes, like the social logic, like the logic that people live by, is not the logic that agrees with this idea that you have about the world. I totally
Mm,
understand that, but it's like everyone thinks like that, right? Everyone feels like their idea is not fully represented, or most people do at least, and for your solutions to just be like, we need to, like I said in the beginning, it's like we need to provide education and spread awareness about this idea, and then
and
create
have
this
group
infrastructure to
projects.
allow it to exist. And it just doesn't, I mean, as a just purely as like a piece of like, political science, or it doesn't feel like it's the actual like ideas or implementations are original at all. Like, I
Yeah,
don't feel like there's
yeah.
anything really original about it. And again, I feel like Richard Wolff does this a lot, where
Mm,
he just kind of attaches himself to these existing things, and like he's got this big voice, and for some reason, he's up at the top. But I don't know. I've never. I've always the things that I've gotten value from him have been like, presenting. Um, you know, there was a pretty decent lecture on like introduction to Marxism I watched a couple of years ago, and
mm,
it was. I don't remember it being like especially dogmatic. Even if it was, there were still some parts that were like useful for understanding. Um, So I think, it's not like he has zero value as a person. But like, this just isn't it. This isn't it.
yeah, yeah. This isn't
Like,
it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, I came to this kind of as what is this like argument for socialism that is also different from Stalinism, basically, right? So
right,
I was like, I want to hear this argument. And I started reading this book, and I was like, "Oh no, there's going to be nothing in this, is there?"
right.
And sure enough, there wasn't. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's that. Um,
Ooh-wee.
yeah, I think we should read something next that we like.
Yeah. I was thinking, I've got some ideas. I'll try and do a bit of research.
Okay, well, we'll announce them when the time comes.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that was a long one.
Yeah. We did both episodes in one sitting, and it's probably been about
back to back.
5 or 6 hours. Wait, no, we
I'm
started.
sweating.
It's been 6 hours, shit. Let's go! Boys!
Boys!
Alright, we will see you in the next one. Or you will hear
Oh,
us
that
in
wasn't
the
the
next
outro just now? Oh, shit.
No.
Bye.
Hey!
Boys.